Okay. Hi, everyone. This is Craig Zelzer from PCN Global with the latest live stream of the Social Change Career Podcast. It's episode 10, season 14. Woohoo. Today, we're talking about building a purpose-driven career in philanthropy with Brad Smith. We'll get into the podcast in about 30 seconds, but just a quick overview for people who may not have joined us previously. This generally goes about an hour. It's live streamed to LinkedIn and YouTube, and we really enjoy hearing from people. So particularly in LinkedIn comments, feel free to let us know where you're watching from, a sentence or two about your work and your questions and feedback, and we'll try to weave them into the podcast. This is one of almost 190 episodes, and 3 quick requests. Please follow Brad on LinkedIn. He's the founder of the Philanthropy Network. That'll go up there, but you can find it on LinkedIn. He's also the founder of Rootstock Philanthropy. So please consider joining the Philanthropy Network and or following Brad on LinkedIn. And for PCDN, we have lots of free newsletters, some that we charge a little bit for. Please consider following us or subscribing to our newsletters. And a podcast request. Podcasting for most of us is a labor of love. There's a few famous podcasters. We're growing. So the number one thing you can do for any podcaster, whether it's this one or another one, is take 30 seconds and rate and share it on Apple or Spotify or whatever platform you listen on. It helps us grow. So those are the requests. So Brad is the founder of Rootstock Philanthropy, as I said, a global fundraising and strategy firm supporting nonprofits across sectors and geographies. His clients have included Massachusetts Institute of Technology, Suffolk University, the Portland Museum of Art, the World Horse Welfare, and the Partnership on AI, among many others. As I mentioned, the Philanthropy Network is a 120,000 member group on LinkedIn. I'll put the link below, which is focused on advancing modern fundraising and nonprofit leadership. When he's not advising institutions or leading online communities, he's deeply committed to helping others build meaningful careers in the social sector. Brad's based in Maine. I'm based in Medellin, Colombia. So the city of Eternal Spring, we can have a little bit of competition about the weather, although it's raining today. So Brad, thank you so much for taking time to share your wisdom and experience and questions, and also all you do to help people in the impact sector in general, individually and systems-wide. And just to get started off, how in the world did you advance or start off in this career in philanthropy? So did you take, because most people don't think they want to work in fundraising. So did you start on a different path and pivoted to this? Did you have a mentor, an opportunity presented it itself?
Yeah, Craig, first, thanks for having me on. It's a great question. I don't know many people who, actually, though it's evolving, I don't know many people who start out their post, high school education thinking I want to get into fundraising. But I taught a class once and I asked everybody in the nonprofit management course, who here wants to be in fundraising? And no one answered their hand, raised their hand, excuse me. And then when I asked who wants to be an executive director of a nonprofit organization or an educational organization, everybody raised their hand. And I reminded them that, tough luck, you are going to be involved in fundraising as an executive director or executive at a nonprofit organization. But for me, my mother was a fundraiser. She worked at a small community hospital. So, that was, I'd seen what it meant to develop, kind of be a part of, the old school advancement idea, which, was about community building and, shaping the social services at a hospital, right? So it was a 40-bed hospital, but, they built a new maternity wing and they, these are things that community philanthropy really enabled. So I saw it at a very small level growing up, but the choice to enter the field was very practical. My family, I came from a very sort of middle class U.S. Household. And when I decided, I started my career in finance, like a lot of young people, and thought this was the answer and what I was supposed to do coming out of college. And then did not enjoy that experience at all. Couldn't find motivation in commission-based sales or commission-based financial analytics. Love the people I work with, but hated the work. So I decided to reboot my whole career after 3 years out of college and go to graduate school with, again, borrow some money, an illogical approach to kind of resetting your career, but I was kind of anxious and kind of ambitious. But my goal was to get into program work, to be working with people. whether that's at a school or with a community organization, boys and girls clubs, YMCA's, that sort of thing. And at the same time, I was a volunteer for my college. I was doing fundraising for my school, right? And I was in touch with the fundraising office on a regular basis. Um, but at the time, the only reason I did it was really, again, financially practical. I got a calling card. If you remember calling cards, as a class caller, I got a calling card so I could call all my friends from college and from undergraduate, and that was great and saved me money, and I could keep up with people as long as I asked them for a contribution to the college. And then when I was coming out of graduate school, I had a few job offers and opportunities. But honestly, like the pay scale for those careers was not going to cover my student loan debt. So I was sort of I painted myself into a financial corner. So, but then I got a call from my alma mater who wanted to hire me into their fundraising office at a salary that was almost twice as much as I would have earned in a program management role. And I remember speaking to Pam Tucker, my graduate school advisor, who I worked very closely with, and was, think of her as an early career mentor, and certainly somebody whose opinion I valued greatly. Professor Tucker said, "Brad, what are you doing? You can't possibly be doing this. You're going to go into fundraising and you're never going to come out." I said, No, Dr. Tucker, you don't understand. This is the financial reality of a young person, of my financial reality. No family money. This is all on my own, shoe leather. This will be temporary. And 25 years later, I'm running my own consulting firm and have, led large fundraising teams and worked at some pretty amazing organizations. And now, this is an opportunity to kind of reflect on that with you, Craig. But yeah, it was not intentional at all. So, but here I am, right? And I think that random walk was extremely enjoyable, and I developed some hypotheses about, how this work can be done, and was mentored by I was fortunate to be mentored by some really remarkable people along the way.
We have people watching from around the world. So again, welcome Evodia from South Africa. We'll get to your question. Please let us know your questions, comments, and a bit about yourself and your work. And just to go back to two questions. The first one is just your wisdom for when people come to you and say, "I'm thinking about undergrad or grad school." Mm-hmm. Obviously, we're probably about the same age. Maybe I'm a little older, but what's your advice? Because you talked about, you went into finance and it was not the right fit, and then you decided to go for further training. So your advice, like, how did you decide, and what do you recommend to other people if they're thinking about upskilling through formal education?
So I was, my father had done the part-time route on graduate school. Like, he was working full-time and then in graduate school, and he had young kids, and was pursuing his master's. And when I said to him that's kind of what I think I was going to do, he said, "Don't do it." It took him 3 years. We didn't see him much. It was a lot of work. Again, young family. It was a lot of strain. But he got a degree effectively for free, right? So there's kind of a middle ground here, right? And so I got some advice from him to say, "Hey, go do this." And I was lucky again when I was I went to the University of Virginia for my graduate training. I got a great job on campus. I ran. So my situation, I was very strongly influenced by my father saying, "Hey, go do it. If you can knock it out, go do it." If I could have done it again, I think, knowing what I know now about the job market, especially today's job market, if you have transferable skills and you're willing to start at the bottom, not expect, like, be humble about your entry into the nonprofit or social impact work, I might try that for a year or two, and just to make sure that you're making the right decision, even if it means cross-training at an organization that has multiple verticals, right? Like, so for example, if you join an organization that has a sophisticated, or even not so sophisticated, but dedicated fundraising program, finding, opportunities to work in multiple pieces of that program. Fundraising is not just, annual giving or putting on a newsletter or e-giving or whatever you find it as. It's a sophisticated marketing and sales program like any other, except you're selling effectively the mission of the organization, and in some cases, very, fine-tuned cases, potential tax benefits if you're working on estate planning and stuff. But there's a lot of places to do that work in this industry. But I might have spent some time. Again, I came to this as an accident, right, later in my graduate school career. But if I was thinking about a career in fundraising, I would definitely find a job at an organization where they're not. And I've said this in a couple blog posts, and I'm happy to share them with the group here, Craig. Don't look for a mission you care about. I think, and that's kind of counterintuitive. Find people who are willing to mentor you. That mentorship and that quality early career guidance is way more important than being embedded in an organization that you care about, which could have a dysfunctional or a culture that's, hair on fire and no mentorship, and you just got to sink or swim. So to me, it's, if I could have given myself the advice again, is to say, do some exploring, find organizations that are committed to mentoring junior staff, where you can cross train across multiple areas, and then decide after a year or two, is this what I want to do for my life and career? And if so, and if advanced graduate training is something that would advance my work, then you make the decision around, a full-time program where you're, year, 2 years embedded plus PhD if you decide to stay on, or you just continue your career progression. But that's very personal. There's economic considerations, there's family and children considerations. So, but I do think there's opportunity everywhere. Find mentorship.
So lots of good questions, and just one other question. And then you had talked about originally wanting to go into programs, So, and were you focused on a sector, or you just wanted to be in nonprofit leadership?
Mm-hmm. So I ran summer camps as a kid, right? Like when I was young, every year in college, I would substitute teach at the end of the school year in my local high school district, and then work at summer camps. And I loved it. And I had a lot of energy, and I came from a pretty and now extremely depressed part of Western Maine, and working with kids that are, have family situations that were complicated. Even though it's America, there's still challenges, right? It feels like almost Appalachian in that part of Maine. It's not, different challenges, but similar inputs in substance abuse and broken families and stuff like that. And deindustrialization had really hurt the area. So I really thought working with organizations that are helping those people would be great. I heard the term palliative philanthropy recently, and it sort of got me thinking about like whether that would have been sustaining for me. But working with young people, like I love working with, I love late elementary and middle school kids, because they're right at the point where I think you can inspire them and they remember, and their attention span's a little longer than the sort of little. So that's kind of what I thought I'd be doing.
Thank you. So let me just bring in the first question from Evodia, who's based in South Africa. She's been working in higher education and student success for about 10 years and starting to look for roles in nonprofit organizations. And she's just asking, what would transitioning look like if you do not have formal experience in philanthropy? I mean, so that's a big question, but I guess, if someone wants to move into philanthropy or development or fundraising and they haven't had training, and let's say they're located in the global majority, just any general recommendations?
Sure. Well, so being inside an organization gives you an advantage, because theoretically you should see how the philanthropy works its way through to program, right? And I advise every fundraising professional, when they get into fundraising, is before you start learning about what your organization does, what programs are in your brochures, even the people who are at your organization, really dig in and understand how the organization is financed, because ultimately we're an arm of finance, for better or for worse, right? I mean, that is the job. We are a revenue producing, you know, we are a revenue producing arm of the organization. One of the few, unless, you might have products that you sell or courses that you do or fee for service activities, but, philanthropy is a big line item. So if you're in program now, understanding how money moves through the university or where you're working is really important, and will make you a more effective fundraiser. When donors ask, so what happens when I make a donation? You can walk them through everything from receipt of gift to how those flow through the university or through the organization. So that's one thing, is you don't discount that knowledge that you developed. One. I think the second, the opportunities in fundraising and philanthropy, again, as I said earlier, are there's every organization from single person nonprofits up to universities like Harvard, MIT, Stellenbosch in South Africa, Oxford, Cambridge. They're all doing some version of international philanthropy, mostly working with a hardwired constituency, though not always. So alumni and friends of the university, maybe former professors and employees to some extent. And if you like having that environment to work in where there's already a depth of connection, like that's to me would be a good place to start. Now, if you're more interested in sort of global impact, finding again, I can't stress this enough. If you're thinking of the transition, talk to people. Talk to senior leaders, regardless of the organization. Review their LinkedIn profiles. Look at the places you might think about working, and reach out to people. And if they're willing to give you time, willing to sit down with you informally and help you navigate a career change, you know that they and their network are probably worth exploring more deeply. What I found is, and this is not universal, but what I found is people in this business can be so busy, but they can be almost too busy to really focus on what's important, which is, I think, developing, or at least giving some fraction of their time to developing talent at their organization or in their community. So find those people who are willing to give you some time for an informational cup of coffee, and buy them coffee, because we love that. Like when people buy us coffee, it's like the best.
I was just listening to this morning. I mean, obviously, I live in Colombia, one of the best coffee countries in the world, but because of all the tariffs and everything, coffee prices are going to be going up. So a question: can you think about so you started as a basically alumni fundraiser, and my son's only 14. It's funny because I think of all the forms of telecommunication I've been through and calling. I lived in Europe many years. I remember having a calling card. It was like $40 or $30 to call back to the US for like 30 minutes. So it's a different world.
Right.
But can you talk a little bit, like, let's say your first campaign that you were part of, whether it was a university, where there was a target goal, and I assume you were part of a team, and what you feel comfortable sharing, like what was the goal? Was it for scholarships? Was it for a building? Was it not for the university? And like, what did you actually do within your role to help achieve that campaign?
Yeah, that's great. So I worked on early in my career, literally, second year into my career, I worked on helping to get started a campaign at Colby College, and we did, the feasibility study, which is a way to understand, the campaign goal itself. We did that in house, so I get exposure to the mechanics, the sausage making, or kind of a capital campaign. Most of that was for facilities. Actually, we had a couple major facilities projects that we were raising money for. Capital in the like physical sense, and of course endowed resources for financial aid, faculty hiring, etc. But fast forward, when I was at MIT, we had a wonderful person, Susan Hockfield, who came in from Yale as the president of MIT, and she was really keen on developing a more human and more powerful undergraduate experience at MIT, which is known for being a very difficult undergraduate experience, and having a really high level and high RPM student body, but focusing on graduate fellowships especially. It was a $500 million campaign. This was in 2006, 7, 8, and I was responsible for I tell people I was responsible for the things that no one else wanted to do. At the time, I was traveling regularly to the middle of the U.S., so everything between the Rockies and the Appalachians, and from the Great Lakes to the Gulf of Mexico, which it's the Gulf of Mexico, just for the listening public, the Gulf of Mexico. And so my role was to organize campaign volunteer committees in major metropolitan areas in that swath of the country. So everything from Cleveland, Ohio, and Detroit to Chicago and Minneapolis, and then down to Texas, Oklahoma, New Orleans. I had a small team, and we were putting together these campaign events and soliciting the major and actually cultivating through the campaign initiatives major donors in those territories, or in those states and those specific markets. And alumni are everywhere. I mean, large universities obviously have a larger alumni body, so there's a lot of people who can be engaged through these in-person events. But what we would do is bring kind of intel back to the university about who's ready to make a gift, and where do we need additional either faculty or programmatic resources, institutional leadership, and bring them into the philanthropic discussion. So, that was, again, still relatively early in my career. And that experience, certainly, seeing the mechanics of that spin up that scale really was eye opening. I hadn't been at a place as large as MIT, and when MIT decides to do something, it's pretty high powered. So you really got to just kind of keep up and hope you don't get swamped.
Thanks so much, and welcome,
Yeah.
John Bosco from Rwanda. Please keep letting us know where you're watching from. And just a practical question, and then I have some job function or skills questions. So when you complete a camp, there's one thing to be always fundraising, whether it's like small donations, but when you hit a goal in a capital or fundraising campaign or scholarship campaign or for anything, how do you celebrate? And are you as you're getting closer to the 500 million or whatever amount of capital, are you already starting to think about what comes next? Do you take a month off and go to the beach? Because it is exhausting and exhilarating.
Yeah. Well, so because everything kind of counted during that period of time, actually, I just see someone joining from Rwanda. I had the privilege of working on an observatory project with MIT and the Rwanda government on top of Mount Kirisimbi. And we raised money to buy the equipment for the climate observatory, which is part of the AGAGE network. So I got to know a lot about, climate research with extramural partners in places like Rwanda and other countries. So, one of the cool parts about being at a global university is just the tourism piece of it. Not tourism in the sense that I had never went to Rwanda, but just seeing the expansiveness of what people do to bring good to the world, to do good in the world. So, talk about celebrating. There was a big party at the end when we reached the goal. Like, it was amazing. The chairman of the board, the president, the entire corporation, a lot of faculty whose projects were funded during this period of time. We raised a lot of money for graduate fellowships. So a lot of graduate alumni who went on to found and run very successful technology companies. We're all in the same place for the big celebration, and it was great. It was like a privilege to be a part of that event. By the way, even though I'm a fundraiser, I hate big events. I'm an introvert actually at heart. So big events kind of, as much as I enjoy like seeing people at the end of it, I'm just wiped. So, but there is a decent breadth, and I think campaigns you hear capital campaign, you think, okay, well, it's just a big number. Actually, the campaign goal is a reflection on what the university or organization wants to be, and it's reflected as a dollar figure. So, $500 million was the goal, but underneath that was extremely well capitalized graduate experience, graduate housing, undergraduate housing, and student life enhancements, on and on and on. But the process of building that menu for a campaign is exhaustive, and it's an internal one, right? So faculty, program directors, others will come up with their financial wish lists, which for that campaign I think was over $3 billion. And then the job of the fundraising team is to try to down select those into things that can actually be funded, right? And then so the process of that selection of the next campaign kind of starts when the campaign ends. But it starts as like a kernel of an idea usually, right? And so for example, but then of course the biggest piece of it at the end of the campaign is just making sure you thank everybody, right? We're grateful. We have to be wired for gratitude as fundraisers, and so that's essential. And donors and prospective donors can tell if you think of them as a mark and not as a person. And so, that's my kind of, I think the thing that may have separated me, or the things I learned early in my career, was that like, I can't think of a donor as a vessel for giving. They're people, right? And there's motivations for why they give and what they might give to, that only through deep conversations with them and their family and their advisors can you understand what might unlock that generosity. But then when you are able to do that, if you are, or if the organization's able to do that, you lead with gratitude. So that's the kind of 25-year distilled wisdom of this all this stuff.
It sounds like a blog post, or a book or a series of books.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
just a random question here. Like, we love kind of crime and heist shows, so use the word mark. And obviously,
Yeah.
I agree. Like, I mean, I've done fundraising and been fortunate to, all different kinds, but nothing at the level you have. And I've seen the good and the bad. I mean, there's a lot of amazing stuff, and we'll get into that. And but most of my fundraising has been more um, contracts and grants. But obviously I was a professor for 10 years, so as part of stuff and money came
Oh,
to my
sure.
department. I've been part of unsolicited. Hey, here's some money, do something. Anyway, but just one question. I was just thinking about this because there's a show called Hustle and originally it was a show in the UK. I forgot the name. Or no, Leverage. It's Hustle in the UK and Leverage in the US. It's a
Wow,
really
cool.
sophisticated and fun one. And they talk a lot about a mark. A mark's only going to give away money. Like, no, you can't make people you can't force people into a heist. They have to have some characteristic about themselves. So two questions here is one, what makes people give? And then two, have you ever seen a show, like a TV show or movie about philanthropy? I mean,
Mm.
there was a show about 30 years ago called The Philanthropist, which was an NBC. It was okay, but I'm just thinking there's so many shows about everything. And you've ever seen something about philanthropy that kind of shows the truth, the good and the bad?
Yeah, good, the bad. So, um, I think the question is really motivations for giving, and then like what would be like the inside baseball of it all, right? Like the dirty or like the unseen underbelly of it. So, um, I think motivation. I think the most generous donations that I've ever worked on are kind of based on the concept of what I just referred to as unfinished business. Like, I'll just speak from my own example. I'm a nonprofit professional, so my wife and I have a house and kids and stuff, but we're not going to be major philanthropists. But if I ever came into a lot of money, which would be awesome, but for different reasons, there's I had a coach and mentor early, late in my high school career, who is still a giant person in my life. And he was a public school, coach and teacher, and then became the principal of the school and spent his whole career there. And I would want to make to say, the only way I know how, other than I've said to him like how important he's been in my life, to make a major donation to name a football field or a basketball court or something after him. Now that would cost a lot of money, and I don't have that, but there are people who do. So, tapping into the unfinished business of their life is, to me, a way to work through like how do you make the biggest impact biggest impact by engaging with individual philanthropists. Um, so I also am a big believer, and this is, if you've ever seen the movie Inception, which is one of my favorite movies, as dark as it kind of is, but the idea of being able to tap into a person's deep, whether it's again unfinished business, their deepest motivations for making a difference, and some of them are ego. There's ego. There's the left brain, which is tax advantages, but that's very rarely the reason. But some deep emotional, unfulfilled thing that might cause somebody to make the largest, philanthropic gift of their life. The other side of it is, again, like, and this is a piece that I chafe at, and even though I know this is part of it, again, going back to the Inception analogy, I hate the sense that we're somehow manipulating, or we're engineering a the optics of something that is purely mercenary, right? We're engineering engagements or encounters or meetings that are really designed to elicit, major donations. And it's a fine line because it can feel manipulative to the donor, and that turns them off. So you have to come at it with authenticity. And sometimes, you've got a campaign goal and a faculty or, looking to fund major projects or graduate students they want to recruit or facilities they want to build. And like, there's an urgency to like, hey, get on with it, like get the money. Um, so there's a fine line between like, hey, we're just trying to get this donation and, these resources in to do X, which we are really hoping we can do, with treating the person as, a human being and respecting their motivations for making a gift in the first place. And so I struggle with that a lot. Like I struggle with that, piece of the work that feels mercenary or manipulative. It's not. I don't see it that way personally. I don't feel that way myself. But it can feel when the pressure is really high on closing or securing a donation or wrapping up a campaign. It starts to feel more, less personal and more mechanical, and that's no fun. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of like the things I struggle with.
It does. I mean, they could have the positive aspect. There could be the negative show on fundraising, the mercenary, and kind of show someone like if you think about the Wall Street shows, and someone's out to, or they take their 15% cut, but we could also have the positive of of people who are really committed to making impact, and they're finding mission alignment between people who, what you said, of unfinished business or really want to. I mean, I don't know what you think of the book, The Soul of Money by Lynn Twist. I read that many years ago.
I haven't read it in a long time, but no, yeah, here that's
because I think it's, go ahead.
Oh, no, I haven't. I mean, I haven't, gosh, I can't remember if I read it or if I just read the back cover but that made the circuit in, the fundraising circuit for a long time, just like Wealth and Families by Charles Collier, and like thinking through like how people think of money. I think that has changed a lot. The barbelling of wealth and the consolidation of wealth has changed the philanthropic conversation enormously. And the layers now between the fundraiser and the donor are growing like by the month, by the week. And in, phalanxes of advisors and financial advisors and tax advisors. And I don't know what honestly, Craig, I don't know what they're optimizing for, but it's certainly not good. And that's the thing that frustrates me about the business is once you start to unmask a bit of like how that philanthropic act has moved away from the person, the human connectiveness, though not in every instance, but in many, and into some other, calculated, more calculated kind of purely, pure dollars and cents impact, pure dollars and cents tax deduction, optimizing for, charitable deductions, et cetera, or estate tax purposes. It starts to get for me it's less human. It's just more, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, the Soul of Money, the interesting thing that, I read it probably 20 years ago, but the idea is that if you see money as a relationship or energy, obviously we have enough money in the world to address most of our challenges. We just don't have the systems to do that. But, if someone has beyond what they need and they're able to give, that, it's not a financial transaction, it's a relational and human transaction. And that kind of approach, it's like energy. That's what I think is really interesting about the Soul of Money. But I want to get to a couple of technical questions.
Sure.
For people who are interested in working in, actually just a very practical question, because sometimes they call it fundraising, sometimes they call it philanthropy, and sometimes it's called development. Do they all mean the same thing to you? Because you can see those things. Or is there anything different about those terms?
Yeah, I think I work in advancement or in development or fundraising. Working in philanthropy implies that I think I'm at a foundation or an advisory capacity. And so, you can be a philanthropic advisor and help people give their money away, based on, again, either interest in optimizing or trying to figure out the right projects to fund and how to fund them. But yeah, I think of myself as a fundraising professional or advancement professional more than as a philanthropy professional. So even though the Philanthropy Network, the group that I founded, is really about like the application of that, like application of fundraising and foundation relations and social impact, like as a betterment of mankind or person kind. To me, that's the spirit of why it's Philanthropy Network. But yeah, I think of myself as an advancement professional.
So just a technical questions for people who are already in the sector or want to move there. What do you see as and obviously it depends on the role, the sector, the type of organization, but what do you see as the core skills, either that are innate to people or people can upskill on, that help make someone effective and have a more successful career in this area? And I'll just tell a very quick story.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
I've had some bad jobs. One was digging holes on a Christmas tree farm. It was just over like a spring break. That was like it was like, but I was a canvasser. I'll say for an environmental organization between like a semester break in college,
Right.
and so I got to go around and ask people to sign campaigns, but
Mhm.
also ask them for money. I didn't mind
Oh
asking
wow.
doing the campaigns, but for the money, I'm like I was horrible, and I remember thinking like if you give money, I'm getting some huge percentage of this money as the canvasser, and just
Hmm.
thinking like this is not ethical. Like, yes, I need money to live, but give it like so. That's like an example. I was
Yeah.
not good in that role. So like, but just thinking in general, like what do people need to develop, learn, and
Hmm.
is it just innate or it can be
Yeah.
developed?
So I think some of it is I don't think it's innate. I think anybody can do this work. I really do. And um, I'll give you some of the best, eh, maybe the best advice. So one thing you have to do is more of a mindset shift. Is take your personal finances out of the room or out of the work you do, because when you start to say, well, I could never give $100 a month, or I could never give $1,000 a month, or I could never even imagine a $10 million donation or 50 or $100 million donation. Of course you can't. Very few people can, right? But it really will impact your ability to apply your skills as a fundraiser. So, take your personal financial situation or relationship with money and either control alt delete it or throw it out the window, something like that. You have to change your relationship with money, right? Which um, so that's like a mindset shift. The second, to me, the best fundraisers tend to be the most organized. And that's an organization, and it's not an organization of like I got my papers in the right place, or I've got my, everything is, where you think it should be, but they're organized in a way that allows them to optimize their time, right? Because the time function, optimizing the time function is the most important fundraising attribute. Like being either out working with donors or working on the next thing that would advance your donor work versus like the administrivia or the desk time of your fundraising work. So that's those two. So mindset set shift, deep organizational skills, and then as I said before, understanding institutional finance and how organizations are financed and how they how money moves through the organization, what what impact does that money have on for student loan indebtedness or research output or competitiveness in relative financial terms when you're recruiting faculty or hiring graduate students. Those are really really important. So your ability to get comfortable with the financial model of the organization is, I think, essential. And then finally, the best. Um, if you feel you have to be able to say I don't know a lot as a fundraiser. Like you're going to get asked questions that I would never have predicted I could be asked in a meeting with donors or volunteers. And you have to be comfortable enough to say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but let me get back to you. So, I don't know, it's humility or just profound self awareness. But that's the other thing I would say is really critical to this work. And I didn't have it initially. Like it took me a long time to develop that. But, after a while, I realized like, oh, I don't know is really powerful because it gives me an opportunity to call somebody and show them that I really heard what they were asking me. So, so anyway, financial, a relative comfort with how an organization is financed. You can't shy away from that. I don't think there's a way to avoid that. Kind of a suspension of your relationship with money in the office, in the professional environment, and then a humility to acknowledge where you don't know something or don't know how to do something.
So just a quick story, then a follow up question. So
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
been on a number of boards and lots of advisory boards. So and I remember, and I'm transparent. So one board I was on, I was like, I don't have a lot of money. I'll give you time and effort. So I think maybe I made a $200 or $300 annual contribution. And there were people on the board. Here's my 60,000. I mean, to me, it was like 60,000, 80,000. They don't even blink. But so I think it's also realizing that there's all types of giving,
Mm-hmm.
and that yes, there's the dream on the board. Our annual, it was two terms, our annual revenue that our organization was like $1.5 million to $2 million, and we dreamed about getting like the big gift, you know, I mean, anything, but I think like it's not always about big giving. But then the next question is, where do you see philanthropy going, or fundraising, and particularly with AI and just so much concentration of capital? Are there any new skills that you think people need to be developing if they want to stay competitive? Like there used to be a saying. I mean, there used to be a saying like coding jobs are going to be around forever, and that's stopping. There still is a saying that if you're a really good fundraiser, generally
Mm-hmm.
you may not have a great job, but there will always be a job. So is that likely to
Mm-hmm.
stay? Or because organizations always need people to help them raise capital.
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. So I'm when it comes to direct, if I were an AI avatar working with a donor, if I said I'm going to create this AI avatar to work directly with donors to engage them and solicit them for donations, that if that happens, I will leave this profession. I think human is the humanity is the foundation on this entire profession. And if the avatars, and there are some that are engaging donors using AI avatars, and I know some of them, they're not fans of me, but I think they're way below board ethically, way below board. So I think there's a way to have AI be a tool in helping fundraisers be more effective and efficient, but it's not a it's not engagement platform. So in that sense, and I've actually lobbied, to the extent that I've lobbied the Association of Fundraising Professionals and professional organizations to outlaw the use of AI avatars in cultivating and especially soliciting donors, even by text, even by like just that should be a it happens. I know it happens. It should be codified as an ethical no. So the way that philanthropy is evolving, as I mentioned, more and more wealth is being concentrated in the hands of a very few. And having worked at MIT, I watched this in real time. I watched the high speed trading revolution, and in finance, and private equity and derivative fundraisers and traders, and then on up into venture capital, but especially in the creation of new types of companies, like think of Dropbox, like that was coded on a bus from Boston to New York because a guy at MIT forgot his little dongle, his little storage dongle at his dorm, and he's like, I should be able to get this on the internet, and then Dropbox, and then on and on. There's all manner of companies that nobody's ever heard of in this B2B space to help businesses do their work and manage their supply chains and logistics. And those people made an extreme amount of money. But on the other side, so there's tons of money, and there's tons of burn within that money. Like people buy houses and cars and second homes and build compounds. And so what's left is this still 2% of GDP, right? Like 2% of US GDP is sort of the ceiling of US philanthropic output. I don't actually see that changing. I don't think people are suddenly going to become more generous. I hate even saying that, but they should, but they won't. So what does that mean for the profession of fundraising? Well, it means you have to be a bit more, a bit less country club, the kind of genteel, like, successful business person running a business in town, or an insurance agency or a bank. They are less the philanthropist as it might be the tech or the high finance person, the hedge fund entrepreneur, or you name it. Um, and those self-made people have gotten to where they are because they are very, very confident in their ability to do something. Now, they also become very, very confident in their ability to do anything, which is part of the challenge. There's no deference to the nonprofit expertise, and I think that's an evolving problem. So I think the organizations that can demonstrate high competence, both in the management and the delivery of services, they're going to win that um, um, the donations from high level philanthropists. So, but what that means is that organizations have to be better as an organization, and that the role of the fundraiser is much more of a facilitator than a solicitor, right? Of those conversations. So yeah, fundraisers will likely always have work, and I think I think organizations that underinvest in fundraising and advancement are making a mistake, because why wouldn't you? I mean, basic economics says invest to the point where marginal cost and marginal benefit effectively cancel out. But most of the time, they're looking for 3 to 5x on every headcount, and I think that's insane. But so they're chronically underinvested. So if those who are even more chronically underinvested will not rise to the top. But if you're thinking about a career that's interesting and then has, you know, a lot of layers, potential organizations, like fundraising is a great place to see the world in that way. Like you see the board, you see executive leadership and how they do their work, and then you get to engage with program. But you're kind of part of the putting gas in the tank of everything. So it's a really great place to learn organizational management. But it's also, you know, we could talk about this too. It's also very high burnout, high turnover, high stress. It's so, you know, that's a whole other world of this business. So as long as the talk list, the substance of the job remains, you know, as long as it evolves along the lines of like, it's still a human to human business, I think it's still a great place to be. I think if AI starts to consume places where humanity should exist, you know, I worry about the profession. I worry about all of us, you know, and that's like, who are we really talking to? Like, I know you're Craig and you know I'm Brad, but that might not always be the case.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot of work with AI for impact, the good and the bad. So I've actually cloned myself and I can train on data. I just haven't launched it yet. Like, but it would only be for a closed community. But
I think it's neat. I mean, I think it's amazing. The technology. I think it's, you know, just like anything else. It's, you know, anything to an excess is probably it's probably a problem.
So you talked about burnout, and actually was on my mind. So I'm thinking of two things. So one, I worked for an international development organization as a program officer. Most of our funding came from government. Obviously, the Trump administration is destroying a lot of that. And I came in on one contract, and they were drafting the second proposal. They got it. I was really nervous. Remember when I got hired, I'm like, how do you know you're going to get the money? But like, they got the second contract. But I remember this was the development person, which is a little bit different than, doing government or foundation. Like, they were so overworked and stressed, and it seemed like, anyway, it was a decent sized organization. I mean, I don't know, maybe at that point it was like 10 million, who knows? But I just remember, like, my impression, like, her job was so important, and that, costing and pricing. I gave like technical input, but like, is there statistics, that the burnout rate among people in fundraising, that 20% leave? I mean, what's the statistics say? And both for people going into this career and for organizations hiring, like, are there any best practices?
Yeah, great question. So unfortunately, it is a high stress, high burnout business. And, I think my 25 years of distilled theory on this is fundraising is a reflection of executive leadership. And successful fundraising comes from strong and focused and clear executive leadership. And some of that might come from the board. When there's deficiency in the executive branch of an organization, if you want to call it that, fundraising will suffer. But the executive never blames them, his or herself, or their self. They blame fundraising. And so the proverbial, what rolls downhill into the fundraising office. Now, that pressure, because effectively the fundraising office becomes an extension of a fragile ego of an executive who's either under pressure or doesn't have the capability in fundraising that they should develop on their own, and so they blame fundraising when things aren't going well. So that's a hard place to be. That doesn't happen in finance or program. Those are much stickier, much longer term positions. But turnover in our business was about 18 months on average, and that is not sustainable. I'm a big believer. When I first started in this business, it was, I was 26. Yeah, I didn't know anything about fundraising, but I was just given a bunch of names and said, go out and raise money. And that was so unsatisfying for me. I actually got together with a colleague and created a training program and a mentoring program so that we knew like everything from like where the copier was, if we needed a copy, to, deep mentoring in like the roles and responsibilities across the advancement team. So, so we had this mentoring program at Colby College where I started my career. And then when I got to MIT, I was really interested. We were turning over 60% of our fundraisers a year. So it was like this constant revolving door. But that to me started with suspect inputs. Even a place like MIT, the interviewing and talent management systems were not particularly robust. So you'd interview a candidate. Mind you, this is MIT, and you get the feedback would be, I like her, hire her, or she seems great, let's bring her in. And it was not very rigorous. We didn't really know what we were looking for, and I think we hired poorly, to be honest. We had people who wouldn't fit the terroir of MIT or the culture. So then we would start with inputs. So I think we started with inputs and a behavioral organizing system, and we came up with, we worked with a lot of internal, we had a lot of internal conversations, like kinds of people we want to bring in and hire, and we came up with a set of attributes, everything from sense of humor to organized ability to operate independently. But also a team player, like can engage team-wise, but doesn't need consensus, can move ahead with imperfect information. These sorts of things to develop a talent management framework for the kinds of people we want to hire. And I'd like to think that legacy still is at MIT. People, it's not a higher turnover office that I left behind, left in 2016. It's not high turnover. It's very sticky. It's got a clear career ladder through the kinds of fundraising we do. We've had administrative assistants move into frontline fundraising roles from MIT if they meet the skills requirements. That to me is the best fundraising organizations will develop a sticky career ladder, and it won't be a reflection of the executive, right? Because that's just not fair. And I've been in that situation, and it's miserable. And you put on weight, you get you start buying a lot of Tums and Maalox, and it's the worst. It's the worst.
Yeah, I have a friend. I won't go into. I mean, a lot of friends or acquaintances who come from different aspects of philanthropies. I have one friend who has raised millions and millions and millions and millions, and then started a job at a reputable organization. And again, this is their point of view. It doesn't mean, but just basically didn't get the support, unrealistic demands, like a timeline, and they left. Like it was causing them a huge amount of stress.
Totally.
And so for people on the job market, anything, I mean, and I'll say another thing, like I've been on boards, and some boards are very professional, and there's like a target and plan, and there's a fundraiser, and the CEO or the president's always doing stuff. And I've been on boards or advisory boards like, hey, should we do this? Should we do that? And it's like, we're all clueless. And part of that's, so it's also like the board, how you put together a board is so friggin' important. And that's a whole nother skill set. But for people interviewing for these roles, any advice on how you discern? Yeah. I mean, sometimes there's huge red flags, but how do you discern that it's a relatively healthy work culture? You're not going to have to, have it's that nice balance of being challenged but not insane.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like to ask questions like, how do they talk about questions that get the interviewer talking about how they see their colleagues. Mm-hmm. Right? And I'll give you a personal example from my own experience. So in 2005, I was at Tulane University, right at the time of Hurricane Katrina. Tulane had to make some hard decisions about staff, and I was let go. I hadn't been there. I was still a probationary employee, and everybody probational at Tulane was let go. And my wife and I were in Boston at the time, and she was a second-year law student and visiting at Boston College. And I started interviewing in Boston, thinking I don't know when I'm going to go back to Tulane. I need a job. I can't just be unemployed. And I remember, I was at another college, which will remain nameless, and I'd gone through about 3 rounds of interviews, and but the person who was interviewing me asked me, so what is your timeline? Right. This is my third visit, my third meeting with this person. And I said, I'm sorry, I've been here. This is my third round here. I'm a refugee. I am homeless right now, and I have no job. And she's like, oh, right, Katrina. And I thought, then I was like, I'm not, even if they offer me the job, I'm not coming here. But, and that, whether that was fair or not to the interviewer, to me, the organizations that focus on you and focus on how they engage with their colleagues and people around them and how they talk about them, to me is absolutely essential. Because if people will badmouth their colleagues or badmouth the organizational leadership in an interview with a candidate that they want to come to this place, which should be a very positive and engaging experience, who knows what they're doing, so to me, like, that's a big piece of it. It's like, hey, tell me about your colleagues. Or, tell me about the types of people you get to work with every day. If they say, well, some of them are total idiots, like, immediately, like, cross them off the list. And that's really frustrating because you might love the organization, but you don't want to be in a place that is, snipey like that. To me, like, those environments are always toxic.
Okay, thanks. So two more big questions, and we'll wrap
Yeah,
up with
sure.
a couple of very small questions. So we were talking before the podcast. Now, I remember the book "Winner Takes All" by Anand Giravas, and we were talking about in his book, and this is a big thing, is that yes, philanthropy is wonderful, but we don't need philanthropy. We need public policy, taxation, and investment, and that yes, people give very generously for all sorts of reasons, but that particularly in this current climate in the U.S. and a lot of the world, there's not a social safety net, and cruelty is ruling, and the idea that some trillion, billionaire or whatever amount of money, like, they should be taxed. And not that you have to state your personal philosophy, but you're working in an industry that's said less than 2% of GDP, which is a lot, but still not. So just your thoughts about being in a system, asking for access to resources from mostly, I mean, not everybody's wealthy, some people, but if you're trying to go for large gifts, that's wealthy people, or family offices,
Yeah.
but just your thoughts about that paradox.
Yeah. So I think the phrase, and I don't know when it started, generational wealth, and started to become like something that people aspire to. I don't know what that means so much but what I think it means is, work is, work or productive work becomes optional for somebody or a whole group of family members. So there's like this idea that the goal is, resource accumulation until you have made enough money or have enough in the bank so that, people who are, in your family have the option of not working or working for lower paying jobs. Um, and I think the asset management industry has shown us retirement that is supposed to be on a beach and like traveling and like, you know, from the beginning. I remember E.F. Hutton commercials, and like it's been know strummed into us that accumulating wealth is important. And then I had this conversation recently about the tech industry. In the in the early days, if you were a manufacturing powerhouse, you built a widget and then you sold the widget, but the widget had to be transported. It had to be obviously built, manufactured, transported, moved, then sold, and then there were intermediaries, blah blah. In tech, right? It's algorithm, apply algorithm, and the distribution costs are effectively zero, other than storage and scaling and coding and et cetera. So it's a very different production function, and that's why you see tech has having created this massive barbelling of wealth and opportunity. So my feeling is if that's the case, the tax environment for that wealth is inadequate for the moment. And by that I mean if you thought that estate taxes or income taxes or short-term investment gains or long-term investment gains or carried interest or whatever, um, these are relatively recent phenomena in terms of wealth creation, and our regulatory and tax infrastructure has not kept up. It still thinks of America as a manufacturing entity when it's really a knowledge entity. So I am a huge believer in much, much higher marginal tax rates, backstopped, or at least that feeds into a better social safety net and system of education in this country. And Bernie Sanders talks about it, and I'm a kind of a populist in that sort of Bernie Sanders mold. Teachers in this country are woefully underpaid. Just think about the teacher salaries relative to other industrialized countries. It's awful. And then social workers making below the poverty line in terms of what they earn in municipality A, B, or C. I resigned from a board of trustees at Maine Audubon when they were going to hire a person who would effectively, the salary they were offering would have effectively ruled out any person with student loan debt, of which I would have been one, single parents, or a person who required car transportation and car insurance with a car that was not paid for. And so I got into quite a argument that became very, very heated with the board chair. How can you offer the salary? Well, it's all we can offer. Well, how can you even put this position out there if you're basically saying you need supplemental income or a trust fund to take this position? And that's the whispering beneath the JD of the person you need to hire. So I think we need in this country, and I think across the world, treating tech wealth differently. If it's not, treating knowledge-based wealth differently than manufacturing wealth. So you build something, your marginal tax rates are lower. Like you build and employ people who work and build. But now if you're an algorithm developing company, you might have 30 people, each of whom, are equity holders, and everybody walks away with 10 million when the company's sold. But you only had 30 people, right? Like it's not like you employed a lot of people. You had 30 really smart coders in a room, and they earned this crazy amount of money. But they still play the marginal tax rates as somebody who built a manufacturing entity. So where's the incentive to do that? Right? I don't see one. So that needs to change. How does it impact philanthropy? I think philanthropy has become disintermediated in this donor advised fund, the Bridgespan Group advisory group. So there's people who are no longer in the fundraising function, allocating capital, and I'll be honest with you, they do not know what they're doing. They say they do, but they have failed spectacularly over the last decade in misallocating philanthropic resources. They won't admit it, and they're MBAs, they're Bain Capital, and they're all these they've eviscerated our ability to deliver services because they thought they knew better, and it turns out they didn't, but they won't admit it. And I'm not alone in this critique, and I think people like Jason Lewis and others who have written about this, are onto this sort of industrialized advisory ecosystem. And that's where you see trust-based philanthropy kind of rising up as a potential antidote to that. But philanthropy will always be inadequate with the needs in the world. We need better public policy. So that was a long-winded way.
I know it was
answer to you, Craig. But no, it's I think it is the topic in our industry, and it's starting to become more mainstream and reckoned with. Like, why do we have foundations? Why do we have them? Why do we have donor advised funds? Why do they exist? And my hypothesis is it's a sticky fee producing asset for finance, for big banks. And when that is finally acknowledged, I think we should see more foundations disappear. But it's people want a foundation because it's sexy and it feels like, oh, the family foundation, we give away money. No, you're giving away money that's already been tax advantaged. You're giving away money that society should have in circulation. And that, unfortunately, is a truth that not many people want to hear who have accumulated that wealth or inherited that wealth.
Well, I could go on forever here, but
we could. I think we see that in this one.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, donor-assisted funds for people not in the U.S., it's basically a way of putting money in a not taxable thing that needs to be given out to charities, but a lot of the time it just sits there and grows. And I forgot the statistics, but there's billions sitting in donor. I mean, they can be really good, but there's billions sitting there that is not allocated. There's very little oversight. So we're going to start wrapping up 3 minutes. Okay. So a question just came in from Jean Bosco from Rwanda, and it's basically saying he runs a small school that works with underprivileged youth and has a hard time getting sponsors. And I mean, this is a huge question, just any quick advice, and then we'll do 2 kind of administrative wrap-up questions. But for Jean Bosco and lots of people, they've got a small organization or nonprofit, and it's hard to sustain these things. So any thoughts or advice?
Yeah, my feeling is that this mobile telephony and engagement is the secret to fundraising in a startup space. And the reason I say that is donors are really looking for an opportunity to sink their teeth into something. And so the more you can, even if there's no audience initially, to routinize the impact, sort of giving donors the chance to see the impact that you're making in real time. And whether it's through a YouTube channel or some kind of documentation of like, hey, money into our organization does this for these kids. Don't hyper produce it. Really, like on the ground with the executive leadership or volunteers, telling a story, right, about what's happening in real time. I think that's a good place to start. The next is, again, chance favors the bold. I think in that way, it's like when you have an opportunity to tell your story, make sure it's the story you want people to hear. And not just the story you want to tell. You might think of the things at your organization as, the best thing going, but if you don't know how people see it, or you're not willing to step outside your organization, look in and say, here's the story I see, that's kind of a mushy bit of advice, but really be honest with yourself. What are your challenges? What are your opportunities? What does, again, thinking of the financial model of your nonprofit, what does $1 or $10 or $1,000 into your organization do? And make sure you know that. soup to nuts. Like, know that completely.
Okay, thanks. And then the last two questions,
Mm-hmm.
just Philanthropy Network and Rootstock. What do you
Oh yeah,
do? Wait, I mean, let's start with Philanthropy Network. How do people
sure.
join? What do you do? What services? Is there a
Yeah.
cost?
So Philanthropy Network doesn't cost anything to join. It's a LinkedIn group. It started as a LinkedIn group. You can look up Philanthropy Network and on LinkedIn, and you can join it. You can also visit philanthropy.network and see what we're kind of building. That includes a job. We actually didn't start a job board because I thought that would be insufficient, but we created a portal where any organization can post a career opportunity for one price that goes to every job board imaginable. So it's not a job board as much as it is a aggregator of postings. So you find you kind of cast a wider net when you're posting a job. We've created what we call Philanthropy Network Academy, where I'm developing courses for designed as both courses and coaching with high level instructors from all across the sector, usually book authors or people who have been in the business for a long time, kind of sharing their wisdom with the community. We also have a partners portal. So if you're developing a nonprofit or looking to, buy your first CRM or a grants platform or, communications platform, like we have really great relationships with a vetted group of partners that we've partnered with. But it's just been a side project for me for most of my career, and especially since the pandemic started, it's been a kind of a community social impact watering hole. And so I'm proud of it, and we'll just see how many conversations we can get going through it. And Craig, you're one of the people I met through it, so I'm a
Yes.
huge admirer.
Thank you. And me too. And then Rootstock Philanthropy, just in terms
Oh yeah,
of services and how people can
sure.
engage. And do you have, typical type of clients and what you help them with?
Yeah, we've done projects ranging from running capital campaigns and campaign feasibility studies down to coaching executives on being better fundraisers. It's we do as much as we can. Almost all of our work over Zoom and telepresence, and that allows us to meet with anybody, anywhere, anytime. So, we started at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought there was an opportunity to do more um, high level coaching and consulting through Zoom. And it's been great. We've done 22 client projects and it's amazing. So, yeah, if we could figure out a way to, if anybody's interested in learning how to be a better fundraiser and develop their own skills, we also do coaching 101. So,
Thanks. And welcome to all the people sharing your stuff. And then just last
yeah.
question. I know you have a meeting. Best channel to engage with you, LinkedIn,
Oh, yeah.
newsletter, just
You can LinkedIn or Brad at philanthropy.network. You can email me anytime. LinkedIn's a great place. I check it a few times a day. Um, But yeah, that's probably the best way to follow me. I'm not on Instagram or Facebook. Kind of a Luddite in that regard. But yeah, LinkedIn's probably the best way to find me.
okay. So thank you so much for sharing your energy, wisdom, big questions. Great. And everyone for joining from all over the world. And again, this will be out as an audio podcast Friday. There's about 190 others. So as we started off with, thank you, Brad. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please follow Brad, join the philanthropy group. Those all go in the show notes. Check out PCDN. Please share and rate the podcast. You can find it at PCDN Global Listen or any podcasting platform. And Brad, thank you again for all you do for impact. And it's certainly a crazy time in the world and the US. And
Oh,
your
man.
work and communities need it more than ever. So thank you so
Well, go
much.
get. I hope your coffee doesn't go up too much in price down there,
Okay.
Craig. But keep up the great work with you as well. It's great to follow along with your work and the amazing work that you do and the amazing connections you make with people. And so, privileged to be a part of it.
Okay. Thank you so much.